Daled Teves' connection with the idea of Simcha. One is in a translation Lashon Kodesh from Likutei Sichos, and one is, I couldn't find a translation, so we're going to be learning it in Yiddish. Okay. One of the reasons for the fact that the day of their passing is a day of rejoicing, because there's others that their day of passing is actually considered a sad day. It's brought down in Shulchan Aruch that Zayin Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu's yahrzeit, is considered a fast day in some communities. It's brought down that Miriam's passing should have been a fast day. There are issues. It's the middle of the month of Nisan, whatever. So we find that by some tzaddikim, it's not a day of rejoicing. But let's say, for example, Lag BaOmer, the day of the passing of the Rashbi was very insistent that his yahrzeit is a time of rejoicing. So what is the reason for rejoicing? Mainly to know that the person, when he passes away, and we remember that he passed away on this day, obviously that should, the logical result of that remembrance should be sadness. But why would a person rejoice on the day of a passing? And even more so, the greater the person is, the more likely one should say that you should be even sadder on the day of the passing. Still in all, we find some tzaddikim, the Rebbe says, that the day of their passing is a day of rejoicing. By the way, Chavdal Teves is this Thursday night, Friday. So it's just coming up tomorrow. Mishum, since at the time of the passing, it's completed and fulfilled the goal and the purpose of the descent of the neshama down here below, and that is why it's a time of rejoicing. In the footnote, the Rebbe says, so what about other tzaddikim? And so he says in other places it's explained why that is so. Essentially, in other places it's explained that those that revealed the Pnimius HaTorah, they were able to reveal the Pnimius of the passing of the tzaddik, which is all the great revelations that take place in the time of the passing. Whereas those that weren't so much involved in the revelation of the inner part of the Torah, they weren't able to reveal that. So all we see is the external aspect of the passing, which they left us, and therefore the people mourn. So now the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this idea of the idea that it was completed and perfected, the purpose that neshama came down here below. The intent and the purpose of the descent of neshama down here below. It's like what the statement is brought down often in Chassidus. The Rebbe always emphasized this. It's a descent for the sake of an ascent. Through the service and work of the neshama in Torah study and fulfillment of mitzvahs, while it's down here within a physical body, so then it reaches a much higher level than the level of the neshama while it was still above, while it was in Gan Eden, before it descended down here below. Skip the parentheses. As high as it was over there above, it does not reach the advantage and the quality that the neshama reaches through its descent down here below, through its avodah down here below, as high as the neshama was in Gan Eden. Aliyas neshama ba kishemesayemes kol avidosa shoyis motel salel aslamata. The ascent of the neshama comes about, is manifest when the neshama completes its entire avodah that was meant to be done, which means on the day of the passing, that's when the job is over, the job is done, the mission is complete. Therefore, the passing of a tzaddikim is considered a joyous occasion. The tzaddikim surely affected and concluded their entire service. And at the time of their passing, Masigim heimes aliyah hagavoy beyoser. So then they attain and they finally get hold of that greatest and highest type of ascent. So therefore, on the very day of their passing, it's actually a very joyous occasion for the tzaddik, because he completed the mission. He's finally gotten to the level that he was striving for his whole life, which is much higher even than the way neshama was in Gan Eden. Okay, that explains why it should be a day of celebration on the actual day of the passing of the tzaddik. What happens the year afterwards and the year after that and so on? Since in every single year it's repeated, the very things that were the first time around, as we know, that's the reason why we celebrate Yom Tovim annually on the date that that particular Yom Tov occurred. And the same way a yahrzeit, because whatever occurred on that date once repeats itself again in following years, every single year on that very date. So therefore every year, the day of the celebration of the tzaddik, the passing of the tzaddik, is a day of joy, just like the first time around it was a joyous occasion because the tzaddik completed his work in this world and therefore attained that level which is even higher than the way the neshama was before it descended down here below. So that repeats itself every single year. Now the Rebbe is going to add that this is something that is a common denominator by all tzaddikim. Now the Rebbe is going to add that really this concept is even more to be found by the Alter Rebbe, because the Alter Rebbe had something unique that even those tzaddikim who we celebrate their yahrzeit might not have had that, or very likely did not have that. Ois beis. Simcha negramis medavar chodesh lo hayam ha'olam, a simcha that's caused by a new matter that never took place before, is much greater than a joy that comes from something that already occurred. This is a little bit similar to the concept that for Sheva Brachas, if you're celebrating the marriage of someone, to be able to be in a full state of joy, you cannot just have the same guests every single night of Sheva Brachas. The din is that during the weekday, Shabbos doesn't apply. If you don't have a new face, it's called Panim Chadoshes, a new person attending by the Sheva Brachas, you cannot recite the Sheva Brachas because it's already old news. They got married, the same crowd came together and celebrated. You bring a new person into the mix, there's something new to give the celebration more of an excitement. So this is across the board, that when you rejoice about something, there's a much greater joy associated with something that's new than something that's being repeated. So he said, though every single time that the event occurs, even though it already occurred previously, who maybe Simcha brings about joy, since even in the day of the passing itself, that the tzaddik is finally completing his mission, this is not something new, as we'll soon explain why the day of the passing it's not even something new. There isn't that powerful joy like with something new that came the first time around. Why is it that under normal situations, when a tzaddik passes away, the joy of him completing his mission and attaining the height and the level of the neshama higher even than the way it was in its source, is something that we don't, it's not considered something new. So the Rebbe explains, third paragraph in the second column, the majority of neshamas, even tzaddikim, of these generations, einon neshamas chadoshes, they are not new neshamas, or like I like to call them, they are recycled neshamas. Heim hoyu kvar bo'olam hazeh, they are environmentally friendly. They were once already in this world, and for whatever reason, they have to return again. The joy that occurs in the majority of people at the time of their passing, because they are reaching a higher level than they were when they were above, it's not so great, because it's not the first time they've experienced that ascent. They were once down here below, and they already rose up during their passing. As though it's true, every single time the ascent of the neshama is in a different way than it is, and that it was in the, let's say, the previous Gilgul, in the previous time that they were here and passed away. Since, but in general, the idea of the ascent after coming down to this world was already experienced. The joy is not so great. The exception to all of this is the Alter Rebbe. Not so the neshama of the Alter Rebbe, who was a new neshama, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Sicha of Chayel Tavshin Hey. Lifnei she'admur hazaken noilad, before the Alter Rebbe was born, loy hoysa nishmasoi klal boilam hazeh. His neshama was never in this world. B'meila, therefore, b'eis talkus she'admur hazaken, at the time when the Alter Rebbe passed away, hoysa simcha rabba ma'oid, there was great joy, v'gedoyla, and it was greater ma'asimcha shahoysa beis istalkus at tzadikim she'etzlam lo'hoyin in neshama chadashim. Then it was so much greater than the joy that is by the passing of tzaddikim, that by them they did not have a new neshama, mishum shezeh hayin in chadash, because by the Alter Rebbe this was something new. She'ira l'rishoyin, it's the first time it happened. Amrli, like we said earlier, chayzer v'nishnim midei shana, it repeats itself every year. Oisam in yonim shahayu v'pam l'rishoyin, the very same matters that were the first time around. Bechal shana kishmagia chavdal Teves, yom chavdal Teves. Every year, when the day of the 24th of Teves arrives, yom ptiras admur hazaken, the day of the passing of the Alter Rebbe, in the year Tav Kuf Ayin Gimel. The day of the passing of Alter Rebbe. So when we come to that same date in the calendar, Chavdal Teves, Meir v'nimshach oisa simcha gedoyla, it shines and is drawn down. That great joy, ubechol shana b'fnali oisa, and every year it's even higher, because as we know, we go up in holiness and higher and higher. Shahoisa b'shnas istal kusay, as I mentioned before in Tovkuf Ayin Gimel, even greater than the joy was in the year of his passing in Tovkuf Ayin Gimel. Okay, it's exciting, it's joyous, it's happy. We got to get ready. Let's celebrate this Chavdal Teves. What should be the result and what should be the outcome of the celebration? So the Rebbe says in Ois Gimel, Bein Shara in Yonim Pa'el Sasimcha Gam Lahasir Medidus Vagbols. Amongst other advantages that joy has, joy affects also to remove different types of limitations, constrictions that people suffer from. Simcha Paritz Geder. Joy breaks through boundaries and barriers. If I feel constrained and I am in a joyous state, so then I will break out of those barriers. Yitin HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hashem should give Shekol Elu She'eshlam Shaychas Ladmor Hazaken, all of those that have any type of association between the Alter Rebbe. Bein Elu She'eshlam Elu Shaychas Ruchni is both those that have a spiritual connection with them. Shaholchim Beruchaisav, that they follow in his ways. In B'maisim B'dibur Machshava, whether they're doing so in action or speech or thought, meaning just by learning his Torah, it's already considered a connection with him. We learn Tanya, we learn Chassidus, where we're connected to the Alter Rebbe. As well as Bein Elu Shemoitzim Begezer Shaloi, and also those that are physically from his branches from his offshoot, literally his physical descendants. Ki ha'av zoichel ben, because a father gives over merit to his child. Lo have the mal matzav shel ben, regardless what the state and situation of the child is. Ki adei benhu, because he's a child. So the Rebbe is wishing all of those that have a connection with Alter Rebbe, both physical descendants and spiritual connection with Alter Rebbe, all the boundaries and limitations should be removed from them, top of the second column. It should be drawn down and come down to them, everything that's necessary that they need, whether material needs and spiritual needs. And the way it should come down should be without any blockages and obstacles. His words rush quickly. Hashem should bless that we should be those that are following in his ways. In our thought, in our speech, and in our action. And not just like in a once-a-year type of thing, but that should be something that we are experiencing in our day-to-day lives, how we are continuing and following in the ways of Alter Rebbe. And specifically, people should study the teachings of Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe gave up his life, was willing to endanger his life, and he was imprisoned for it. That involved a very dangerous imprisonment. He could have been executed by the government for it. So if the Alter Rebbe was willing to give up his life for it, so we should be interested in following in his ways, in studying his Torah. And not just studying his Torah, and to act in the customs of what Alter Rebbe taught in the teachings of Chassidus and the directives that Alter Rebbe taught in Chassidus. Now we're going to go on to a part of a Farbrengen from Chav Daled Teves Tafshin Lamed Ches. This was from Tafshin Yud Zayin, 1957. This is from 1978. And here we're going to, again, this is in Yiddish. It'll flex your Yiddish muscles. We're going to go to the second column of the page, Ois Ches. Concerning making a Farbrengen on a yahrzeit, is the seemingly there's a discussion. How it has to be, the way how we act in a day of a yahrzeit and the day of a passing of a tzaddik. Interestingly, the Rebbe would make, if I remember correctly, in all these different Farbrengens that involved the passing of, especially for someone that was closer to the Rebbe would make a siyum on a Masechta, etc. Why? Because even if there's a reason to fast, we know that a siyum will override the fast. So therefore, even if there's a reason to be sad and in a state of mourning, but the Rebbe was very much halacha oriented, and with all the spiritual explanations of how to be, we're supposed to be joyous on the yahrzeit of some tzaddikim, the Rebbe also wanted that there should be a halachic, a well-grounded halachic anchor for celebrating. So therefore, he would actually make a siyum on a Masechta, sometimes a siyum on the whole Shas, and so on, to be able to give a celebratory reason for the Farbrengen, in addition to all the spiritual things. But now the Rebbe is going to address it from the spiritual aspect. As you say, we find a clear directive from the Alter Rebbe, of the Alter Rebbe ben Eger to Yom Hilula from the Maggid, concerning the yahrzeit of the Mizritcher Maggid. The Mizritcher Maggid's yahrzeit was on the same day that Alter Rebbe was released from prison, as we're going to speak about soon. Yutes Kislev was of Tavkuf Lamed Gimel, about 40 years before the Alter Rebbe passed away, but the Alter Rebbe passed away of Dal Teves, this was Yutes Kislev, the Tavkuf Lamed Gimel, this 1873, his Rebbe, the Mizritcher Maggid, passed away on Yutes Kislev. And from what the Alter Rebbe and how the Alter Rebbe referred to the yard site of his Rebbe, of the Mezritcher Magid, we can understand how to react and consider the yard site of the Alter Rebbe. Was derfun, the Rebbe says in the second paragraph in Ois Ches, in the middle of the paragraph, was derfun, is verstanden, bin zu yom Elul Shaloi. From what the Alter Rebbe said about the day of the passing of the Mezritcher Magid, he said also about his own celebratory day, about his own day of passing. Eine von der größten Simchas, sein given by Alten Rebbe, one of the greatest times of rejoicing that was by the Alter Rebbe, is Dr. Viertes Kislev, is the idea of the 19th of Kislev. My father-in-law, the Friediger Rebbe, called it the Yom Tov of Yom Tovim, and the Rebbe even speaks Sichos about explaining how Viertes Kislev is the Yom Tov of all the Yom Tovim. Like at the previous occasion, we spoke about this. Like I said, the Rebbe elaborated upon this particular unique expression. Was der Inyan Viertes Kislev is doch negeya, nicht nur zu dem Alten Rebbe allein. The idea of the 19th of Kislev doesn't just matter for the Alter Rebbe himself, because this is something that occurred with him. The whole event of being redeemed from his imprisonment. It was something that impacted all Jews till the end of all generations. Because the continuation and the revelation of Chassidus is something that didn't just matter to him, but it impacted Jews for all time. And also it matters for the general observance of Torah mitzvahs because Chassidus impacts how and the degree and what strength and so on we fulfill Torah mitzvahs. Last paragraph was durch der Geula of Viertes Kislev, through the redemption of the 19th of Kislev, it was accomplished and came about the idea of your well springs being spread outward, which is what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, is a time when I will come, when your well springs come outward. And the Alter Rebbe was a vehicle for that with the Chassidus and with his redemption, it is Kislev. Und durch, top of the next page, und durch der Reif wird der Kosimar der Malka Mashiach, through the spreading of your well springs outward, so it becomes what but Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, the master will come, that's the King Mashiach. Was der Fund is verstandig, from this it's understood, as that Inyan Viertes Kislev is an Inyan Hachi Klali. The idea of Viertes Kislev is the most general thing, was again, it matters to the entire chain of descent of all the spiritual worlds. The Rebbe says an amazing thing. Viertes Kislev, some people say, Lubavitcher celebrate Viertes Kislev, Chassidim celebrate Viertes Kislev. The Rebbe says, Viertes Kislev doesn't just matter for Lubavitchers, doesn't just matter for Chassidim, doesn't just matter for the whole Jewry. It matters even to the nations of the world. Because when Mashiach will come, that's accomplished through your well springs of the Baal Shem Tov being spread outward, which is the whole idea of Viertes Kislev, like we said, the vehicle for bringing that about. That Zayin der Oiftu will be the accomplishment from Oz Efech Alam Safa Brura Goymer Lov Dishchem Echad. Then I will transform to the nations that they will all serve Hashem with a clear language to serve Him all as one. So therefore comes out the joy of Viertes Kislev, or the events of Viertes Kislev impacts all creatures, even Lahavdul, the Umas Oilim, even the nations of the world. So, getting back, this is all parenthetical. Getting back, how does the Alter Rebbe look at Viertes Kislev? It was his Rebbe's yard site. He should have been all broken up about it, even after the positive events that happened. But it's concurrent with the day of his Rebbe, the Mezritcher Magid's yard site. But what did Alter Rebbe write? Just the opposite. When the Alter Rebbe writes in his letter, wegen the Gula von Yutas Bekislev, when he's describing the redemption of the 19th of Kislev, that's when he says that when I was reading about Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, I went out in peace. All these things are in that letter where the Rebbe describes it. The Alter Rebbe describes it. Schreibt he writes, as das ist gewesen bei Yom des Kislev. This was on the day of the 19th of Kislev. Yom Gimel Shoch Likutei. It was on a Tuesday, which the third day of the week, Tuesday. Twice it said in Ma'aseh Bereishis, Hashem said that he saw that it was good. And Alter Rebbe adds to this, Yom Hilula Rabba Sharabeinu HaKadosh Nishmasei, the great celebration of our holy Rebbe, Neshama is Gan Eden, meaning the Mezritcher Magid. Seemingly, again, how can you call it such a great day if it's the day of a passing of his Rebbe? Das Lachudim, seemingly, that Inyan von Hayom Hilula Daftach HaReisruf Nat Noah Havchis Nit Kint Noach Shel Simcha. The idea of a day of passing has to evoke by a person the opposite type of emotional state, not an emotional state of joy. Zetmenach we see, as ein Dom mentioned, there are those people, Vaser Yom Hilula is verbunden mit ein Inyan Shel Simcha, that their day of passing, as we mentioned, some tzaddikim, their day of passing is connected with the idea of joy. To such a degree, by the Alter Rebbe, like we said before, the Mezritcher Magid's day of his passing became so transformed into joy that eventually became a Yom Tov of Yom Tovim. Wie der Alter Rebbe hat abgepasst mit der Gerzem Hilula von Rabbi. Like the Alter Rebbe ruled concerning the day of the celebration of his Rebbe, in other words, the day of his passing of his Rebbe, as the Inyan HaGula Fintes Kislev verbunden mit Yom Hilula Rabbi von der Magid, that the idea of the redemption of the 19th of Kislev is connected with the day of the great celebration of the Mezritcher Magid, das heißt, as das Anin Shel Simcha, that's the idea of joy, because or else it wouldn't make sense for the Alter Rebbe to speak about the joyousness of the time and connect it with the passing of his Rebbe. Obviously, when the Alter Rebbe associated those two things in his letter written in celebration of his release, that means that the idea of Yitas Kislev is also seen as a celebratory event. Wie bald has the Alter Rebbe abgepasst. Since the Alter Rebbe ruled concerning the day of celebration of the Mezritcher Magid, Ados an Inyan Shel Simcha, that's an idea of joy, is der Psak euch benegerz Yom Hilula Shaloi from the Alter Rebbe. So then that ruling is also concerning the day of celebration of the Alter Rebbe. And the Rebbe brings over here the famous rule that the Rebbe always says, that once one of the Rabbeim say something about themselves, about another one of the Rabbeim, so then automatically it applies concerning themselves as well. Das is al derech Teiras HaBaal Shem Tov. This is similar to what the Baal Shem Tov teaches. If the Mishnah, what it says in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Nifroi min ha'adam medaitoi shaloi medaitoi, that when the neshama comes above, they collect payment, meaning for what the neshama did down here, they make sure he has to pay whatever the consequences are, both from his mind and not from his mind. What does it mean from his mind, not from his mind? Either he knows and agrees and participates in the decision-making process about the consequence of his action down here, or he doesn't know and it's not up to him, and it's up to the heavenly court. What's it mean? Medaitoi, shaloi medaitoi. So the Baal Shem Tov explains, as mefrekt by im sein Meinung b'negea atzveiten, that we ask the person who comes before the Beis Din Shel Mayl, before the heavenly court, we ask him, what is your opinion if someone did X, Y, and Z? But the truth is, the X, Y, and Z was done by the person himself that we're asking his opinion. Und b'shas paskin b'negea zu dem Zweiten, when he rules that that other person, quote unquote, should be such and such a consequence, was das is medaite, that's what it means. It's from his knowledge, his participation. He's involved in the decision-making process. Giter arois demselben Psak euch benegert zu sich allein. So then automatically he is issuing the ruling concerning himself. Afal pias, wenn das gesagt benegert zu dem Zweiten, hat nicht gewusst, als der mitpassend darauf euch benegert zu sich, though that when he was saying this ruling about someone that did X, Y, and Z, he didn't know that he was referring back to himself. That's why it's shaloi medaitoi. So it's both together. It's with his knowledge because he is actively participating in ruling on this particular case, but he doesn't realize, that's the loy medaitoi part, that he's ruling about himself. This is also the Rebbe brings down. That's why it says also in Pirkei Avos that lifnei mi'ata asid litin din v'cheshbon, before whom you're going to be giving a ruling, like a court case that gives like a judge giving a ruling, and before who you're going to make an accounting. It goes the other way around. First you make a cheshbon, first you make an accounting, and you say you owe him or you owe him, and then there's a din, there's the psak din, there's the ruling. Why does it say first the ruling and then the accounting? Because he asked the person, how do you rule in such a case? Then we turn around and we make an accounting. You are the one about whom we're talking about. So if when it comes to something about seemingly even a negative thing, a negative consequence, so the Rebbe says, how much more so when it comes to the positive? Valderich says, in a similar vein, is also in our case, we bald as the Alter Rebbe abgepasst. Bin again, from their Magid of the financial Simcha, since the Alter Rebbe ruled concerning the day of the celebration of the Mezritcher Magid, that this idea of joy, for this we also had delivered a ruling also concerning his own day of passing, his own Yom HaElulah. And this the Rebbe is constantly, for example, speaking about, since the Frierdiker Rebbe said something about the Alter Rebbe and so on, so therefore this means about him. So Chassidim say this about the Rebbe as well, that if you're saying this about the Frierdiker Rebbe, and what did you always teach us? That whatever you say about another, especially a good thing, especially one Rebbe of another Rebbe, for sure it applies concerning him. So that's where Chassidim take this from, that whatever the Rebbe said about the other Rebbeim is equally applying to the Rebbe. Anyway, another point, the Rebbe, this is a very Geshmak Nekuda, the Rebbe also said, at least on one occasion, that this is the reason why a person should also be in the habit of always talking and thinking good about another. Because if a person's the habit of always talking good about another, so when he comes to the Bezdin Shel Ma'ila, and they'll ask him, how do you rule in such and such a case? So since he's in the habit of always speaking positively, he'll always find ways to be Malabet's Chus, to find merit on that person. And then it's going to turn around and say, this psak din that you just now gave applies concerning you. So it's beneficial for me to get in the habit of talking positively about another, because when they use this on me, I'll have spoken well about myself, etc., etc. Anyway, back to the topic about the Simcha during and at the time of a yard site, especially the yard site of the Mezritcher Magid, the Alter Rebbe. Eis Tes. Und der Fund ist verstanden, bin ich zu der Yom HaElulah Rabbe from the Malten Rebbe. From this, it's also understood concerning the great day of celebration of the Alter Rebbe, as das Alderich wie die Hilula from the Magid B'Yudas Kislev. It's similar to the celebration of the Mezritcher Magid on the 19th of Kislev, because, like we said before, what the Alter Rebbe said about the Mezritcher Magid applies to him as well. This haste, so, but also content-wise, that we spoke about, that Yudas Kislev was about spreading the well springs. In a similar vein, it's Chavdal Teves. Das heißt, this means, just like the 19th of Kislev is connected with the idea of spreading your well springs outward, so too the 24th of Teves is also connected with the idea of spreading the well springs of Chassidus, the well springs of Baal Shem Tov, outward to bring Mashiach. Und zusammen damit wird das Eilula Rabbe Kipshutai. And along with this, it becomes the literal idea of Hilula. In the term, in the Gemara expression Hilula, it's referring specifically to the joy of a wedding. That's how powerful Yortzeit is compared to the joy of a wedding. A simcha gedoyle beyoysa, very great joy. Was a simcha gedoyle beyoysa is verbunden mit hilula chasna davke. A great joy is connected specifically with hilula, which in the Gemara terminology means a wedding. Kimavur baruch and hemshech samach the samach tafresh nun zayin, like in this series of Mamorim of the Rebbe Rashab said at the wedding of the Frierdiker Rebbe that speaks about the great power of the joy of a wedding. And therefore, our initial question about should we be joyous on the day of a Yortzeit or not? So the Rebbe says in the last paragraph, was das namt up milchatchila the shaila anal sivches. This takes away already initially the above mentioned question. Wegen Eisvadus and Yemelula about a Farbrengen on the day of a Yortzeit. Let's skip over a little bit to the next page. Ois Yud. V'hamaisa v'ikr, action is what is primary. Moisav Zayin b'yeser says v'yeser oznam inyan hamaisa poil, to add and increase in a so much more powerful way in the idea of action. Sayin limud nigla Torah, both in the study of the revealed part of the Torah, Sayin limud pnimis Torah, and both in the study of the inner part of the Torah, and Sayin kima mitzvahs, and also in fulfillment of mitzvahs. And Tondas na noifen for your foot to do this in a way of spreading your wealth strings outward. We get that. Amol, like we spoke about on a previous occasion of state ma'ina sechel loshen rabim. Why does it say your well springs in the plural? It should say your wellspring, the wellspring of the inner part of the Torah, because it's not just limited to that. The far was is dod and mayin vidos and nigla Torah. There's the wellspring, the way it's embedded and found in the revealed part of the Torah. There's the wellspring, the way it's in the inner part of the Torah. And there's the wellspring, the way it is in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. The idea of a wellspring is, as there's verbunden mit dem Makir, it's connected with the source. Was der far is a mayon metayr bekolshu. A mayon functions just like a mikveh. A spring is just like a mikveh, but it has something more powerful than a mikveh. A mikveh must have a measure of 40 saw. If it doesn't have a measure of 40 saw, it's not a kosher mikveh. A wellspring, even the minutest drop of living well spring water can make someone tahir or something tahir. So, for example, the times that are based on Mikdash, they could have even, let's say, a pin had to be tahir sometimes or whatever. You could immerse it in that little droplet of water of a wellspring, and it would become tahir. Bizar's metayr von allen Jahren mafilo von an inni was verbunden mit avia voice von hebratare. The idea of the wellspring is so powerful, it makes complete purification, even from something that's the total opposite of purity. Top of the second column, und die drei inyanim hanal, these three above mentioned matters. Nigla Torah, the revealed part of Torah, Pnimis Torah, the inner part of the Torah, und Maisa mitzvahs, and the actions of mitzvahs. Darfen sein aneufen for your foot has to be in a way of spreading your wellsprings outward. Kimeduber kam upon, like we spoke about many times, the diuk bezem. The exact expression about this is darf sein aneufen for your foot, and in chutza it has to be in a way of spreading, and it has to be in a way of outward, where the Rebbe says that the very wellspring itself is transposed in the outside, and that itself is in a way of spreading. And to do this with great joy in the literal sense. Since it's a great day of celebration. Was die Simcha wird gufa wird noch mehr moisiv sein in der Minyan für Futzmaya Sachachutza, because the very joy itself of the Chavdal Teves of this great day adds and increases and makes the spreading the well springs much greater. Und durch dem wird mehr sein der Machishena. Through this will even speed up that what the Hebrew says, I will rush the Geula in the Machishana Gufa, that in the rushing it will be rushed itself. The King Mashiach will come now.